like butter. Well, howdy friends. Brian Flechsig of Mad River Outfitters in the Midwest Fly Fishing Schools, and welcome back to another one of our fly fishing tutorials. And today, a real quick one. I just wanted to touch on a kind of a concept that we've talked about quite often here on the channel. I especially talk about it when we talk about leaders. But that is the concept that when you break fly fishing down into its basic form, there's really only two, or technically 2.5 techniques, okay? And those techniques are going to dictate quite a few things. Those techniques are going to dictate maybe what rod you might be using or prefer to be using. It's most definitely going to dictate what leader you're using. And then of course, it has to do with the flies. But the first technique is called contact fly fishing. And contact fly fishing, just again to give you a better definition, is when you're going to cast the fly out, okay, and you're going to have contact with the fly. You're going to be moving the fly. And in this case, you want a leader that's going to transfer the energy all the way from the tip of your fly line right to the fly. Now, of course, this is streamer fishing. If you're in a trout stream like I am today, that's streamer fishing. The rod is going to come down, your line is going to go under your finger, and you're going to be imparting action. You're going to be, again, moving the fly. You have contact with the fly, okay? And you're using your stripping hand here, your opposite hand, and maybe also your rod tip to impart action to the fly. Now, this can also be called down rod fishing. You'll hear us talk about this especially moving forward, but you can also refer to this as down rod fishing. As soon as the fly hits the water, the rod comes down. In fact, in most cases, when I'm contact fly fishing, you want the rod tip right at the water or even under the water, okay? But contact fly fishing, to be honest with you, most of what I do is contact fly fishing. Whether it's, for example, all saltwater fishing is contact fishing, bass fishing, bluegill fishing, 99% of smallmouth fishing. Did I say saltwater? Pike or muskie. That's all contact fly fishing, okay? If you're fishing a crab or a shrimp in the salt, you're going to make that crab move along the bottom. You're going to make that shrimp act like a shrimp, okay? So really a large portion of fly fishing is contact fly fishing or down rod fishing. You want a leader that's going to transfer energy all the way from the tip of the fly line right to the fly so it straightens out, and then the rod's going to come down. So being down rod fishing, therefore you're typically going to want a 9-foot or shorter rod. I know some folks are going to argue with that, but under no circumstances in our world, in my world, is a 10-foot rod a streamer rod, okay? If I had a 10-foot rod and I wanted the rod tip right at the surface, I'd have to be up here with my arm, and that's just not practical. Not to mention most 10-foot rods, just by their nature, are going to be a little bit too limber for contact fly fishing, and you're not going to get the right what our friend Kelly calls the jerk, strip, retrieve, and what have you. So for contact fly fishing, you almost always want a 9-foot or shorter fly rod. Okay, so non-contact fly fishing is really the only other foundational technique in the sport of fly fishing. But non-contact fly fishing has two parts to it. And first and foremost, you have dry fly fishing, okay? And for the most part, when you're going to cast a dry fly, you typically want that dry fly to float with the speed of the current as if it were unattached to your leader. In other words, you do not have direct contact with the fly. You're not imparting action, okay? Now, you can, and in certain cases, twitching that fly certainly can induce a strike, but for all intents and purposes, Dry fly fishing is going to be, for the most part, dead drift or floating with the speed of the current. So again, you don't have contact with the fly. Now, again, this is going to have ramifications on what kind of equipment that you use. For dry fly fishing, I would say the length of the rod is not as important, whereas contact fishing is down rod fishing. Dry fly fishing is going to be kind of middle rod fishing, okay? You don't want the rod down, or instantly the current's going to grab all that line from your rod tip to the fly, and it's going to drag the fly unnaturally, okay? When you're fishing a dry fly, you're going to typically want to mend. So having that rod a little bit higher, keeping as much line off the water as you can without pulling the fly. That's the trick. The key to successful fly fishing is control. So controlling your line, controlling the drift, mending as you go, and then still having enough control to be able to set the hook, okay? One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when I first started guiding. I did some guiding in the Great Smoky Mountains, and our good friend Mac Brown, who trained me to guide down in the Smokies, he used to stand behind me, and I would make a drift, and he would tell me, talk to it, talk to it, talk to it, talk to your drift, talk to your drift. You're constantly manipulating that line on the water so that the current doesn't grab your line and pull the fly unnaturally, okay? Again, there's some situations where dry fly fishing is contact, and all you do is simply raise the rod and you move the fly. But whatever the percentage is, 80% of the time, you're gonna want that dry fly floating naturally with the speed of the current, so that is non-contact fly fishing. And you want a specific leader to do this job, okay? You don't want a leader that lays out in a perfectly straight line. If your dry fly leader lays out in a perfectly straight line, like a streamer leader, a bass leader, a bonefish leader, that current is gonna, again, instantly grab onto that leader and drag your fly, pull your fly unnaturally. So having a leader that's much more limp and supple and that lays on the water in some coils instead. There's even such thing as called a wiggle cast, where you wiggle that rod tip, putting coils in your line and your leader so that it takes longer for the current to straighten out. And a very limp, supple leader is typically going to be the best case scenario, okay? And an 8.5, 9-foot rod, sometimes even shorter. Remember, the key to successful fly fishing is control, and you know, an 8.5 or 9-foot rod is going to give you much more control, okay? I usually don't go to a 10-foot rod for dry fly fishing. I just think it's overkill, since it's kind of mid-rod fishing, not down rod, not up rod, but mid-rod fishing for dry flies. So a lot of different options you can use as far as a rod when it comes to fishing dry flies. Next. The other part of non-contact fly fishing is nymph fishing, okay? And really, the goal of nymph fishing is exactly the same thing as dry fly fishing. I mean, people have written volumes and volumes of books on the great mysteries of nymphs, and people are so often confused. And I think really the only difference between nymph fishing and dry fly fishing is that your fly is bouncing along the stream bottom instead of on the surface. But really, the ultimate goal is to control that drift, to manipulate your line via mending and line control techniques, to where the fly is riding with the speed of the current as if it were unattached to your leader. You're going to mend, you're going to use your rod, and in this case, nymph fishing is often called high stick nymphing. Okay, and in this case, the rod is going to come up much higher. Contact fishing is down rod fishing. Dry fly fishing, we'll call it mid rod fishing. High stick nymphing, your rod, you really want to be as high as possible. And my goal is to keep as much line and even butt section of my leader off the water as possible. Okay, that's going to allow you to control that drift to where you're going to get that dead drift. And then of course, if you do want to move the fly, sometimes you can kind of pick it up and reposition it, or at the end of a drift, you can lift that fly off the bottom of the stream and make it swim up to the surface. In fact, that technique is called the Leisenring lift. I believe it was introduced to the world by James Leisenring at sometime in the 50s, but it's literally just raising your rod so that you bring that nymph up from the bottom to the surface of the water, basically as if it was an emergent pupa or an emergent nymph of some sort. But still, the end result is the same. It's still non-contact. You don't have contact with the fly. It's bouncing along the stream bottom as if it's unattached to your leader, okay? So being high stick nymphing or uprod fishing, you definitely want a rod, preferably, that's 9 to 10 foot. In fact, when I'm nymphing, even in tight quarters like we have here, I'm almost always fishing a 10-foot rod, sometimes 11-foot rod. If you talk to the Euro nymphing guys, they're all using a 10.5 or 11-foot rods. And that's for a reason, because that longer rod gives you greater control over what your drift is doing in the water. Your mending is so much easier and more effective, and you're able to keep more of that line and butt section of leader off the water. So a longer rod is going to be beneficial when you're high stick nymphing. And then having a properly designed leader. Okay, your dry fly leader for non-contact dry fly fishing, you want it to be limp and kind of supple, basically all the way down to the fly, so it kind of collapses and lays in coils on the water. Well, a nymph leader is a much different animal, okay? That soft, supple nymph leader, there's no way. We all know that a good leader starts in the butt, and that butt section of your soft and supple nymph leader is not going to have what it takes to kick over a strike indicator, potentially split shot, and maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 nymphs at any given time. So it's a much, much different leader in the respect that it has a stiffer butt section that allows you to effectively cast this heavy rig. Okay, and then this nymph leader, which we've explained to you on many, many occasions, it's basically amnesia, 2 limp midsections, a tippet ring, and then my appropriate tippet, usually 4X, maybe 3X, 4X, 5X. I usually don't go smaller than that on my tippets, but you can. And this nymph leader is perfectly designed to execute what's called a tuck cast. Okay, with a dry fly, you do want that leader to kick the fly out there and then lay in coils. Where it was this nymph leader, you want that nymph leader to completely collapse halfway down so that the fly, the split shot, and the strike indicator basically enter the water in the same zone, allowing you then to lift your rod, control that drift, and the nymph and the split shot sink a lot more effectively. So basically, contact fly fishing versus non-contact fly fishing. Non-contact having 2 components to it, that being dry fly fishing and nymph fishing. And let's face it, non-contact fly fishing is, for the most part, in streams, although it can be in lakes as well, but mostly trout fishing. Almost any other type of fishing is going to be contact fly fishing, but it's important to understand the subtle differences between the rods that you might best use for this, and then the differences between your leaders. So we'll of course be talking a lot more about this. We have in the past, we will continue to, but I think breaking fly fishing down into 2 foundational concepts or foundational techniques, contact versus non-contact, will help you out a whole bunch moving forward. So there you have it, friends. Thanks for watching as always. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions whatsoever, remember, send those questions over to admin@madriveroutfitters.com. It's our one and only email at the shop. Or better yet, pick up the phone and give us a call. We always love to hear from you folks. So thanks as always for watching. Hit that like button and stay tuned because we've got a lot more coming at you.